Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show. My guest today is Blake Hutchison. He is the CEO of Flippa, which is the number one marketplace for buying and selling of online businesses. And so if you're curious about that topic, maybe curious about buying a business or what it'd be like to sell an online business, we're going to dive deep into that. He's been with them for about 5 years and had a number of entrepreneurial endeavors before that. So you'll definitely want to stick around for that. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise25, my company where we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you go to our website, rise25.com, and you can learn all about what we do there. All right, Blake, so pleasure to have you here. Now, first of all, a little bit of background about you. You're CEO of Flippa, and it allows people to buy and sell online businesses. But prior to that, you were Chief Revenue Officer at Luxury Escapes, one of the world's fastest growing online travel agencies. I grew up as the son of a travel agent. My mom was a travel agent. Back in the old school days when you marched down to the person on the corner and said, I want a ticket to Las Vegas. Doesn't really work that way anymore. So it's kind of been interesting to see that industry change so much. And you also led strategic partnerships at Xero. But first, I love asking people about how they were as a kid and the little, entrepreneurial endeavors, sometimes not so little, that people engaged in. And you grew up in Australia, where you're based now in Melbourne. And in a hilly area. And despite that, you convinced your dad to let you have a paper route as a kid. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound that impressive, does it, to do a paper round? But what was really interesting about it was just the negotiation between myself and my father, because we lived a long way away from my school. So we drove an hour and a half each day to get to school, which meant your paper round had to start exceptionally early in the morning.
Yeah.
Not only that, I lived in a regional area, or more regional area of Victoria, which is the state that Melbourne is in. Anyone seen the Australian Open, you'll know what Melbourne is. And so that was a very hilly area, a very difficult paper round, and there was no other kid in the area doing it. I convinced the news agency to let me do it. They had typically driven around and delivered the paper that way. So anyway, bit of fun, bit of hard work. Actually, I did end up listening to my father. He convinced me to quit after about 1 year because, I just couldn't stay awake at school. I was starting that early in the morning.
That's rough. I think having a paper route at that age is incredibly impressive. So, because I remember as a kid having friends that did it and I wanted to sleep in. So the fact that you even did it all, I think is impressive. Now you end up moving to the United States, moved to the San Francisco Bay Area around age 25. My friend Rob Castaneda, who's in my EO group, is also from Australia. I know a bit about what the kind of culturally, what the entrepreneurial culture is like there. There's something called tall poppy syndrome, which is a thing. Maybe you can kind of explain a little bit about what it's like growing up in that culture and then going from Australia as looking for a place where there's more of an entrepreneurial culture in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I mean, I think the culture's shifting a little bit, and there's been some fantastic homegrown global tech startups coming out of Australia.
Like Atlassian and others that are phenomenal, right?
Yeah, Atlassian and Canva and 99 Designs and those types of businesses, clearly have a global footprint. But I would say that tall poppy syndrome and culture still exists today. So for everyone out there who has not heard of that before, all it really means is to cut down the best and not celebrate that kind of crazy, ambitious, entrepreneurial winning mentality that Americans have in their blood and do so well. And so that can be quite off-putting for entrepreneurs, because instead of celebrating failure, it's very much that, I told you so. And once you're the best, if you're at the top of your league, be it sport, be it business, be it whatever, instead of celebrating that, there tends to be some kind of aversion to that. I would say that I believe that still exists today. I've certainly witnessed that. But for me, yeah, I mean, I certainly love the thrill of the chase. I love how almost the crazy ambition that is highly unlikely to succeed operated in the US, and I certainly got a lot out of that having moved there. And whilst I was probably a bigger risk taker than most, I learned having moved to the Valley how big some risks were that were being taken by others.
And I love that one of your first stops, I think one of your first stops there was with Lonely Planet, which I backpacked around Europe after college, and with a Lonely Planet guide in my backpack, which, by the way, talk about, that is like your guidebook for going out and having adventures. So it's a business as well, but in addition to it also is something that helps people to go out and expand their horizons. What was it like for you going to work for that company in the Bay Area?
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, that was West Oakland, and that was West Oakland in 2005. So, West Oakland 2005 is not as gentrified as it is now. Property prices certainly aren't what they are there now. And, for a young guy moving countries and rocking up to the docks of West Oakland to help a global publisher license, digitize the travel content and license that travel content to travel portals, and those interested in travel content around the world, was super interesting for me. We undertook some wonderfully ambitious initiatives. We had an initiative called National Passport Month. At that stage, only 13% of Americans had a passport. We lobbied Congress and were able to work with the local Congresswoman, Barbara Lee was her name, in Oakland. Still there to pass a bill and declare a particular month National Passport Month, and try to build some momentum around the importance of travel, how it can change people and benefit people. So a wonderful experience for a young guy. And at that stage, TripAdvisor was still early, Yelp was still early. So Lonely Planet was a maven. Lonely Planet was very much considered innovative, although did get left behind. So that gave me great exposure. I remember as a young guy going to the Apple offices and finding out about the first iPhone and them recruiting their first publishers to deliver the first suite of apps. And now, of course, the App Store is doing hundreds of billions of dollars a quarter for their developer community. So you get awesome exposure as a young guy sitting in a business that has got great credibility, and you learn a lot from those experiences. And of course, we were doing something brand new. I was licensing their travel content. So I was kind of a disliked individual within the organization because publishers ran that business. And all of a sudden you're saying, well, you're sitting on 30 years worth of great travel content. Let's monetize and commercialize that.
On this new device that no one's heard of before.
Yeah. Our first, I remember the YouTube, Lonely Planet's first YouTube travel channel was a little bit controversial. It was hard to get that contract done, but a lot of fun for a young guy, spending time with some of those early stage tech businesses.
There's a lot of fear for these traditional media companies that had this content that was used to selling it for $30 a pop in a book form, that if we're going to give away all this stuff that we put all this money into through, whether it's YouTube or an app or on the web or something, that we're going to completely cannibalize our own business.
Yep, exactly. I mean, that discussion had every day, and ultimately Lonely Planet did end up getting cannibalized by not itself and its own initiatives, but by so many other innovative travel companies out there. So yeah, super interesting experience. And then, of course, I went to work for a startup just prior to the GFC. We raised $13 million from what was Lehman Brothers Partners, then became Tenaya Capital. And I was on the early stage team there building a trip planner. So, unique experiences, and the Valley gave me a lot of great learnings.
Now, what brought you from that, which is kind of more in the travel space in the Bay Area, to founding Good 44, which was a venture capital backed specialty foods, I guess, distribution company, kind of like a Good Eggs, which we have here in the Bay Area that delivers better foods, better grocery items to people?
Yeah, so the short answer to that question is I had to continue to innovate my way through concepts to pay for a roof over my head. So I moved from San Francisco back to Melbourne, Australia. When I moved to Melbourne, Australia in 2010, Americans will laugh at this, but there was a grand total of $70 million in venture capital.
17, 1-7.
7-0.
7-0 in Australia?
Yep.
And yeah, so, that's not a lot by US standards. Yeah.
No. And that's changed wildly since then. But I turned up here and essentially was copying what was a tried and true content distribution method, which has become popular again in 2023. So it was a daily newsletter.
Yeah, it's funny how that's kind of come back around again. Newsletters are hot again.
And so the daily newsletter, which was a copycat of, Daily Candy, Thrill List, Urban Daddy, those types of publications that some people in the US will be more familiar with, was my first business back here. And so all we did was we had publications in Melbourne, Sydney, and Perth. They're three of the biggest cities here in Australia. And the whole idea was that instead of going to a website to find out what was new and hot, you got a daily recommendation. Now, by nature of that publication being about foodie spots, bars, and things like that, we started to amass a really large audience. So we had 100,000 people receiving our newsletter a day, very, very high open rates. But of course, making money from that publication back in 2010 was quite difficult. People weren't used to sponsoring newsletters. So the short answer to your question, John, is I had to come up with a new concept that utilized the 100,000 audience. And so we started asking them, right? And ultimately we found out that they loved specialty food. They were high income earners. And we started to think, well, given the huge landmass, the geography that is Australia, what if you could amass in one spot and curate at scale a great selection of very, very high quality providers of specialty food, chocolate makers, wine makers, honey makers, cheese makers, butchers, the list goes on. And that led us to create that specialty food marketplace. And, it worked to an extent, but I wouldn't be sitting here today if it was clearly a rocket ship-like success.
And we were chatting beforehand, there's this crazy story about Airbnb. So when they were establishing Airbnb, the founders of Airbnb in 2008 during the presidential campaign went out, and I'm not making this up, created a cereal, one of which I think was called Obama O's and the other was McCain something. It was like, and they went and they sold these boxes of cereal, and it was a way of funding their startup. And you actually did things like that for your startup.
Yeah, and it was probably around the same time. Clearly, we're not as wildly successful as Airbnb, but I think the things that entrepreneurs do to survive, most people would think are a little bit silly. And I was telling these stories in San Francisco 2 weeks ago to a number of different people, and admittedly, we'd had a few beers, but they certainly were laughing. So, the first thing I did was I created a box of goods and sold it before it existed. So what do I mean by that? Well, we'd amassed this 100,000 audience. We were making no money. I was really struggling. I'd moved my Mexican-American wife from San Francisco to Australia. And, life was pretty lean. And so I put up a landing page on top of our blog, and it was called You Taste. And so it was a photo of a box, and in that box was really gourmet goodies.
Now,
But
is that hard to find in Australia, or gourmet goodies? Is there are a lot of gourmet providers, food
there's
providers?
a lot of gourmet providers and people love it. And I thought that a curated box delivered monthly, much like a Birch box there
Yeah,
over
yeah.
in the US for cosmetics and makeup and things like that, would probably resonate. The problem with my concept, John, was it didn't exist when I sold it. So put up the photo. I put a
So you
price
didn't
point.
have like providers lined up. You figured you'd go find that afterwards. Okay. All right. Had you penciled out whether the economics would make sense?
Yeah, I'd penciled out whether the economics would make sense. I didn't pencil out whether I had the energy to go and pack the number of boxes that I just sold the 24 hours prior.
How many did you sell?
So we sold 300 within 60 minutes. And
I hate going to the post office, so that sounds like my own nightmare.
had to obviously shut the thing down and then said to my one and only employee at the time, let's go shopping. And so, of course, we had to go and buy the boxes. We had to go around to all of the providers, and they didn't know who we were. They weren't going to give it to us for free, and they certainly weren't giving us discounts. So the first box was a function of driving around to 20 different providers, buying as much produce as you could, trying to negotiate bulk discounts for those goods, heading back to the office, packing those boxes, and then packing your own car, and then around, because it happened to be summer in Australia, so you don't want to put perishable goods.
Oh, so you go and deliver them too?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
No. So that was example number one, and that was pretty ridiculous to the extent that, it was a good way, though, to keep a roof over our head while we built the marketplace, because we ended up running that concept and that business for about 18 months. And we were able to satisfy what our subscribers wanted, and they really enjoyed it. So that was kind of fun.
So is it profitable though? So it's profitable. You have 100,000 email subscribers. You have people buying the box. So at some point, did you decide you just didn't want to run that kind of business, or what happened?
We layered it into the marketplace, so it became an offering on top of the subscription food marketplace we were providing for all of these providers. So imagine Etsy saying, before our marketplace exists, we'll actually retail our own rocking chair.
Yeah. Okay.
So
or what Amazon does, creating their own Amazon brand. Yeah.
Now, startup press in Australia at the time was very, very, very difficult to come by. You couldn't convince a journalist to write about you. They wrote about big, boring businesses, and to some extent still do today here in Australia. So I created a fake PR company, and this is a bit embarrassing to admit, but it was called Secret Squirrel PR.
Secret Squirrel PR, okay.
Yeah, and there was a huge foodie culture in Australia, as I've already alluded to. And so I couldn't get PR for my marketplace. Despite having 50 great vendors on it, I couldn't get PR for it. So I created this concept, which was a ripoff of the Patron Dining Society, Secret Dining Society in the US. And I created this thing called Secret Dining Society. And the Secret Dining Society could only be purchased on my marketplace.
Okay.
And so I sent this press release to all of the journos here in Australia who were food-related journos, not tech startup journos.
Okay.
And said, hi, Mr. or Miss Journalist. My name is Jude Smith, gave myself a fake name, sent them the press release, and started taking phone calls about this Secret Dining Society.
Mm-hmm.
They then said, well, we want a photo shoot. Of course, I couldn't attend, but I got a top celebrity chef to attend. And that top celebrity chef fronted Secret Dining Society. And all of a sudden, we had all of this traffic coming to our marketplace to purchase Secret Dining Society. But of course, we had all around that our vendors.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a function of that, I got some press for the company. I won a lot of customers to the actual marketplace, but I could never reveal myself at these great dinner parties because, of course, who I said I was wasn't actually who I was. But sometimes, John, you'll do whatever it takes, and I'm not sure I'm that proud of those examples, but ultimately it got me a little bit further along the journey.
Got to do what you got to do to survive. Yeah. Well, I want to flash forward a bit to Luxury Escapes and then eventually to Flippa. So Luxury Escapes, Talk a little bit about what that business was, kind of a high-end luxury business, luxury travel business.
Yeah. So I think, you're very much a relationships guy, and you understand the benefit of and the power of those relationships. There was one potential acquirer of my business. That potential acquirer happened to be the founder of Luxury Escapes. And so his business, which at the time was called Aussie Commerce, which was a network of e-commerce businesses, was interested in acquiring the business. Ultimately, I waved the white flag, said, I can't do this anymore. It's been a really, really tough 6 years. And I went and worked for one of the fastest growing cloud accounting SaaS businesses called Xero. But I kept in touch with that individual. And so over the growth of his business, in particular, Luxury Escapes, we got talking. And he said, I've got lots of businesses. This is my biggest and best performing. Would you consider coming and running that for me? So that's what I did. So it was an online travel agency, and it was essentially flash sales for luxury travel. And it still exists today. It's absolutely killing it. It does $1 billion in transaction value. And, when I took that over, we were doing really well. We took that to around 350. It's the fastest growing company, not even the fastest growing travel company, fastest growing company in Australia at that stage. And a wonderful learning experience of the power of high transaction value businesses.
Rather than these specialty food, inexpensive little jar of honey type of things. Yeah.
The power of community, because the word of mouth when someone went on a luxury escape was just so extraordinarily and infinitely powerful for us as a company. And frankly, despite the attractiveness of tech, the power of sales. And so that business still today is so extraordinarily dependent on a relationships-driven sales team. And that sales team has some of the most revered relationships around the world with some of the biggest hotel brands and best hotels, from far-flung locations like Alice Springs all the way through to the Maldives. So that business works really well, and I was proud to have had a part in its history.
Well, so given that Flippa historically didn't have a sales team and didn't spend money on marketing and didn't have those relationships, and yet was still already quite successful, I can see why they would bring you in. Then, given that you'd run that with Luxury Escapes, they wanted to add that to their portfolio. That was probably the next level of a growth opportunity for them. Before we get into that, though, tell us a little bit of background about the history about Flippa. It's been around for 13 years. How did it come about?
So origin stories are really interesting, and we talk about the cold start problem in marketplaces a lot. Flippa was benefited because it came out of a developer forum and community. That developer forum and community is still around today. It's called SitePoint. So SitePoint.com, which people can go and check out, spun out two businesses. Business number one was 99 Designs. We alluded to that before. So 99 Designs was, of course, for designing logos, landing pages, anything design related. And that was founded, if I remember correctly, probably in 2007. And of course, Flippa then came after that. So what they recognized was that there was a large community of people exchanging assets, be it design or, in our case, websites and apps. So that's the origin story. And they were smart enough to realize that there was more value in the brands spinning them out standalone than there was trying to run them all as part of SitePoint as essentially service offerings. So that was the beginnings of Flippa. It's a really cool story in the sense that bootstrapped, profitable, Australian run, but with a global customer base from day one, without a single sales rep and certainly not $1 spent on marketing. And so, that was probably a little bit easier back, still a wonderful story, of course, but probably a little bit easier back then just because competition was just not as intensive as it is now. But regardless, that was very attractive to me because I recognized that if you could add a strong reputation management layer to the business, if you could improve the marketplace's integrity by adding a managed part of the marketplace, and managed marketplaces, of course, are very common today. Things like Open Door, things like Uber, things like Airbnb to an extent. My sense was that you could scale this, not only scale it, but you could actually move up the value chain and go from very, very low transaction values to very, very high transaction values. So we applied that theory. Yes, we put a sales team in the US and we started to build relationships on the ground. And in addition to that, we approached our marketing from the perspective of two things. One was community, and the second one was owned media. So community is a function of being on the ground, regularly meeting your customer base, much like Yelp did in the early days, much like enterprise sales does with their fancy dinners where they look to woo bigger enterprise customers. We were doing that with a community of online business owners and entrepreneurs. And the sales piece, of course, is really interesting because much like, say, Xero, people are as obsessed with understanding the value of their online businesses as much as they are their homes and condos and apartments. So where you orientate your sales team is in providing that value. It's worked really, really well for us and is still the cornerstone of our growth flywheel that we have architected. And we're really proud of that.
How did you figure out what services to start offering from more of a self-service model to now I'm looking at your website and I see you have Flippa Due Diligence, you have Flippa Legal, you have Flippa Private, Flippa Broker, you've got financing, you've got all these different offerings. How did you figure out what you would offer?
So back then, and we're talking about 5 years ago now, we had to figure out which side of the marketplace we were actually serving. And so we decided, by nature of taking listing fees off people and contingency-based success fees off people when something sold, that clearly the paying customer was the seller, the business owner, the entrepreneur. And so as a function of that, that's where you orientate your initial focus. And then you look at what the pain point is for those customers. And the pain point was, well, I've built an asset. I've been running that business now for 3 to 5 years, but I don't know what it's worth. And so we noticed that a lot of people were inquiring about valuations, but we didn't have a product. And so the first product that we built was a function of passing all of our historical data into a model and coming up with a fairly rudimentary algorithm, which is now very sophisticated, to ascertain the value of someone's asset based on multiple different variables: age, domain authority, revenue, expenses, platform that they operate on, and of course, lots of usual elements around how you value a business. Now, that proved to be really successful to the point that, we went from having a 3-week turnaround time to a valuation to a 30-second turnaround time because we had the data that we were sitting on. So that was really pivotal because now we were sitting on 3,000 to 5,000 valuations a month. And from that, you can build a sales function. You've got the leads. You can score those leads. You can organize those leads by geography and business model. You can train staff on those business models. And that's still today the biggest lever that we can pull. It's where we win our customer base.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I want to ask you about how the pandemic, 2 years into your time at Flippa, how that affected things. But before I do, were you the first CEO, professional CEO brought in after Mark and Matt? Okay. What was that like coming in as the first CEO from a founder-led business? Because I know that's not easy.
Yeah, so they certainly had GMs and things like that. I mean, the good thing about Mark and Matt is they're extraordinarily good marketplace entrepreneurs, but they recognize that they are 0 to 1 guys. So they're very good at the hustle. They're very good at ideation and early stage execution. And I've got a history of working for founders. So Luxury Escapes, I was running that business on behalf of the founder. At Xero, I had very, very close ties and a working relationship with the founder. At Nile Guide in San Francisco, I was reporting to both founders. So, you develop a bit of an understanding of founder DNA, different personality types and the eccentricities of different founders. And so I think for them, it was a bit of a safe landing because I had a history of understanding the hack, hustle, growth at any cost. Well, I wouldn't say growth at any cost, growth endeavor that those types of entrepreneurs will come at a problem with. So that was good. I mean, what I needed to do was live their vision. And their vision is to democratize the exit, to enable business ownership for everyone, to build the investment bank for the 99%, and enable people to transact with each other, celebrating the endeavors of those that have come before with what those that are coming next want to achieve. And I bought into that. Funny story, John, I sold my own business on Flippa. So when I was contacted about the opportunity, they were quite discreet in mentioning who the company was. Well, it's very obvious to me who the company was.
You can figure it out.
So I think that helped them a little bit, knowing that, I understood the use case. I empathized with the customer journey, and ultimately I bought into the vision. So that was actually wonderful.
Yeah, definitely having been a customer. And then tell me about March of 2020. What was that like for you at that point? You're a couple of years into implementing these new ideas, and then the pandemic shuts everything down.
It was a bit of a nightmare. We just built our first US team, but I hadn't met them, and I was due to fly over there. If I remember correctly, this is November 2019.
Yeah.
And, I was saying, well, no, I'm going to get on this plane. And the board was like, no, I don't think you are getting on this plane. Because, of course, we thought it was pretty short term and we didn't know what to expect. I mean, long story short, Flippa has not yet been impacted by the pandemic, but we will be, and positively. So what do I mean by that? The average age of a business that sells on Flippa is 4.5 years old. So I didn't get the peaks and troughs that many businesses got. But I expect a spike in 1 to 2 years' time, because as all of these businesses have matured and more people seek out side hustles, financial security, financial freedom, as they use the platform economy, which is more prolific than ever before. Shopify, Amazon, Google, the iOS and Android ecosystems. I would imagine that Flippa is very well positioned to capitalize on all of the entrepreneurs that have been and all of the entrepreneurs that will come as a function of shifting mindset.
That's interesting. So you're viewing it as the influx will probably come, 4 to 5 years in after this influx of people who started businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, but I want to ask about what are you excited about in the role with Flippa now, looking forward to the future?
So we're building some really, really great products which make, micro M&A possible for more people. And one of the challenges right now is, of course, you've got fewer assets and so many buyers. And so there is a paradox of choice going on. When a seller lists on Flippa, on average, they're getting 150 inquiries. That's a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot. Yeah.
So you've got to do a great deal to help that business owner understand the right buyer and adequately match them. So it'll sound a bit funny, but for simplicity of explanation, it's like Tinder for buying a business. We've essentially architected, it's real AI, it's learning on the fly, it's 2 graph neural networks sitting on top of our business owner database and our buyer database, and it's looking at hidden and latent and hidden intent to ascertain whether someone would be a good match. And as a function of that, we've essentially answered that question, who would buy my business?
Hmm.
And that's a question that so many business owners ask us. And so now, as a business owner, a broker, or an advisor, you can log into Flippa. And once you've connected all of your data sets, because we connect to Shopify and Stripe and PayPal and Amazon and all of those different things, the matching engine goes to work and it spins up in front of you those buyers that are most likely to want to buy your business. And then from your keyboard, you can pick and choose who you would like to invite to consider your deal. And so that takes away the necessity and need to have a public marketplace. In fact, what you can do is move to more of a private marketplace environment.
Which is good for a lot of sellers who want to have that. Yeah.
Where someone lists of any price point and Flippa will serve up the most, Flippa will serve up the most relevant buyer pool for you. So we've been working really hard on that. And in fact, yesterday was the first day we sort of attempted that at scale. So there were almost 15,000 matches and invites issued yesterday. And it was quite extraordinary to watch this play out. Open rates on the emails was 70%. Click-through rates were very, very high, and ultimate number of discussions created as a function of those invites was at 6%. So you're talking about 6% of all of your invites resulted in a new discussion for a prospective business owner or a prospective buyer to business owner. So we're really excited about some of those initiatives, and we'll continue to build on that so that it makes it just so much easier for buyers and sellers to do business together.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because, I've recorded podcast interviews before where we talked about that. My company, Rise 25, we are this year going to be set as a goal to do our first acquisition. And even though I'm a lawyer by training and background, it's an overwhelming process. And learning about it, educating yourself, and then sifting through all the different opportunities out there. And I just remembered something. This morning, I sent an email to this brokerage firm that has 4 or 5 different reps who are sending me and my business partner emails. Every time a new opportunity comes along, we get 4 or 5 different emails asking us to opt into an NDA. And then we have to send these follow-up emails. And then there's like 5 or 6 conversations happening. It's an absolute mess. So I think I'm your use case, is someone who's looking for better matching engine. So that's really cool that you guys are building that.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is complex, right? You're talking about an emotional decision for the business owner, and you're talking about a very high value transaction for the buyer. So you've got to get this stuff right up front, because the relationship you can build between the two parties up front is actually pivotal to getting a deal done downstream.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I forgot to warn you beforehand that I like to ask this final question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. And I'll just preface it by saying that I'm a big fan of gratitude. I'm a big fan of expressing gratitude to people who've helped you along the way. And while a lot of people will mention, their family or friends or their team, what I'm really like to hear people talk about is their peers and contemporaries, maybe colleagues, maybe a founder of one of these businesses that you came in and you ran. Who would you publicly want to just acknowledge and thank for helping you in your journey, Blake?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of people for sure. I mean, the founders of Flippa are extraordinarily positive in their outlook for this company, regardless of the peaks and troughs that all startups go through. So a very, very big shout out to them, because when you join a company, those relationships are going to be absolutely critical, and they've been steadfast in their support. Secondly, I would thank our people and culture head. So her name is Rebecca O'Connell, and she is very much a silent achiever behind the scenes, ensuring that not only do we have the fun perks and benefits that all of your staff want, but that I am given the support I need to be the best possible leader I can be, while she takes care of some of the really, really critical people and culture initiatives, and in many cases, issues. She just handles those so seamlessly, and I'm very thankful for that.
That's great. Blake, this has been a pleasure. Where can people go to learn more about you and Flippa?
Yeah, LinkedIn's my thing. So get me there, Blake Hutchison. I'm sure you can find me. Otherwise, obviously, we'd love to help any business owner or buyer out. So feel free to get me on email too. I'm at blake@flippa.com.
And also, you guys are doing these local meetups in different cities around the United States, around the world. Where can people get more information about those?
Yeah, so we do meetups all over the world. You can also request where you would like a meetup to happen. So the best way to find out about those is literally to type in exit meetups, Flippa exit meetups into Google, or you can go to flippa.com/the exit meetups, and you'll see a range of meetups happening all over the world. We've got London coming up, San Jose coming up, which is down the road from you, John.
Yeah.
We've got New Chicago and Phoenix coming up in August, September, and November as well.
Very cool. Blake, thanks so much.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.